I still have no idea why this was justified. I have very strong beliefs that this was not legal.
Lawmakers were shocked over a number of revelations made in a committee hearing today.
What are y'all doing with the $10 million?
That is a question for the foundation. They are the
That's a question for ACA. They directed the payment. It looked like a creative way to try and, without oversight, send $10 million of taxpayer funds to Hope, Florida.
The chair of Hope Florida's board tried to answer the many questions directed at him.
The public reporting has made evident that mistakes were made.
Hope Florida's chair admitted he was appointed without being told of any goals, that Hope Florida has no staff, that there are no minutes of any meetings, no financial documents, and that no board members signed conflict of interest forms.
Is that what I'm hearing right now? Members, I'm sorry, I am a little flabbergasted at this revelation.
Chair Alex Andrade has serious concerns, thinking the funneling of funds could rise to the level of money laundering or wire fraud. He said he'll now seek testimony from the foundation's attorney, Jeff Aaron, the heads of the two nonprofits that moved the money, and maybe Attorney General James Uthmeier himself.
Andrade is demanding receipts of all communications involving Hope Florida to figure out how money from a state Medicaid settlement made it from there into two political action committees.
If they do not provide that information in a timely manner, we may be required to obtain that information with the use of subpoenas.
When I think of the Florida House Health Care Budget Subcommittee, and it's not often, I don't think of fireworks, I don't think of excitement or drama, but that's exactly what's been happening the past couple of weeks in Tallahassee, in the state capitol, since Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times reporters Alexandria Glorioso and Lawrence Mower broke the story about this $10 million Medicaid settlement that seems to have been diverted to the charity of Casey DeSantis, the first lady of the state of Florida, wife of Governor Ron DeSantis. And now it is under serious investigation by this subcommittee and its chair, Republican Florida Representative Alex Andrade, who is joining us now. So glad you're wearing a different tie than in the clips that we just showed. By the way, very rare that we have not just a Republican lawmaker on the show, but any lawmaker on the show. The Democrats didn't like me much when I was in the party, certainly less so since I left last year. But thanks so much for being here live from a bubble on the Florida House floor. Why this? Why now? I mean, there's been a lot of conversations about the governor's use of public funds, particularly last year, over $15 million. It was reported that he was spending directly from state agencies, money that you guys earmarked for very specific uses for taxpayer benefit, that he was using to run ads, to buy paid advertising against Amendment 3, the Florida Constitutional Amendment for recreational marijuana, against Amendment 4, the Florida Constitutional Amendment to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. It didn't seem to be a big issue to any of you guys at the time. So why this? Why now?
Well, no, your point's well taken, but I think the circumstances are a little bit different, right? There's it's squishier to say that PSAs with a slant, being purchased by a public agency are demonstrably, criminal or anything like that. In this circumstance, what we have is the executive office of the governor, his chief of staff, James Uthmeier, involving himself in a settlement agreement for $67 million, shaving off $10 million of that, directing it to Casey DeSantis' charity, Hope Florida Foundation, and immediately getting two dark money groups to go ask for $5 million apiece. And the second they get that money, they send it to his PAC. So there's the distinction there of, we have this path of Medicaid money ending up in a matter of days in the chief of staff's PAC. And so that's the big distinction. I mean, we're now facing the potential for fines from the federal government for misuse of Medicaid money. And we have, at this point, information that tends to show that our attorney general committed money laundering and wire fraud.
You are an officer of the court. You're an attorney. And so when you use these terms, you talk about, I've heard you reference a possible conspiracy to use Medicaid money for campaign activity. You've just said, wire fraud, money laundering. I mean, these are some pretty serious allegations, and you do so, though, from a point of view of someone who understands what that means. What evidence so far, if any, do you have to indicate that those alleged crimes might have occurred here?
Well, when James Uthmeier involved himself in the settlement with Centene, and he directed that $10 million go to a 501c3, And then he immediately, personally, we have text messages and phone call records showing that he personally reached out to these two dark money groups, told them to ask for this money. And the second those two groups got the money wired to them, it ended up in his PAC. So he's involved at every step of the way in this process. And that's where you get into this kind of conspiracy. He knew it was Medicaid money when it was part of the settlement. He knew it was a tax-deductible donation to a charity when it went to the charity. And then he knew that the second these two dark money groups would receive the money, they would send it to him and his PAC. I mean, shoot, if he was acting in a above board manner, he would have raised red flags and said, hey, literally last week I told you guys to ask for millions of dollars from this charity. Now you're sending me money. Please tell me it's not the same money. He didn't do that. In fact, he's proud of it. He gave statements today saying essentially the ends justify the means. And, he's fighting for kids because he fought against Amendment 3.
This is what I call the whisper test. Does it pass the whisper test? And what we do with the whisper test is we whisper something and to describe something. And we'll say, like, for example, let me tell you what I'm going to do, Roy. I'm going to raise some money, millions of dollars, and I'm going to donate it to a charity that helps children in underserved communities.
Yeah, why are you whispering?
Right, why are we whispering? That doesn't sound the least bit suspicious. But now, Roy, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to divert $10 million in a Medicaid settlement into the charity of the First Lady of the state of Florida. And then I'm going to immediately send out $5 million each donations into these political dark committees that we're going to use for political advertising, one of which is actually run by the then chief of staff of the governor. That sounds like some shady shit. It does not pass the whisper test. It's like, wait a second, no, that sounds like you should be whispering that. That sounds mighty shady and mighty suspicious.
And mighty illegal.
And mighty possibly, allegedly illegal. So what do we even know, Representative, about this charity, Hope Florida Foundation, co-founded, if not outright founded, by Casey DeSantis, Ron DeSantis' wife, a presumptive gubernatorial candidate in 2026 here in the state of Florida? What do they do? How much money have they ever raised? $10 million sounds like a lot of money to get in one fell swoop. $5 million grants sounds like a lot of outgoing money from an organization like this. What do they do? What do we know about them? What is their kind of public-facing filings and reputation, and what is this all about?
It's been a black hole. So they've never filed a Form 990 as a charity, meaning they've never reported to the IRS how much money they've raised or how much money they've distributed. Based on information that we now have, other than this $10 million dark money Medicaid fund transfer, they'd only raised about $2 million in total, and they'd doled out about $500,000 to charities in the form of like $10, $20, and $30,000 grants to charities around the state. So those donations, right, those $20, $30, $40,000 donations, those went through a process at the Florida Department of Children and Families. The state agency had to review those grant applications, had to sign off on them, check them, make sure that they were above board and everything like that. In the instance of the $10 million that went to these two dark money groups, and then both of those dark money groups sending it to James's PAC, there was no review by DCF. We found out yesterday that DCF wasn't even told that this $10 million was going into this bank account. It's shocking to me that the state's attorney general couldn't even cover his tracks better.
Wait, it's
Do you honestly believe that's credible?
I mean, this is the problem now. It's like the guy can't even crime right. The guy can't even crime straight. I mean, like, you'd hope that the attorney general would be able to cover up his criming a little bit more efficiently. Representative, let me ask you this. I'm looking at some of the donors to this organization from what we do know from like its first year. I think I have here, and it looks like they're like all state contractors. Is it a conflict of interest for companies who do business with the state like this? Do they feel pressured to donate to a Casey DeSantis pet project? You've got companies here like Simply Healthcare, Centene, who was the company that was responsible for that initial $67 million Medicaid settlement, $10 million of which was diverted to this organization. But you've got Medicaid companies who just got reprocurement, who got multi-billion-dollar, multi-year contracts with the state of Florida, who seem to be the only people really donating to this charity to begin with.
Oh yeah, no. I would say like there's nothing necessarily untoward about contractors wanting to curry favor with the governor's office, right? Like it's probably in their best financial interest to try and develop a good relationship with the governor's office however they can. I mean, we have state contractor vendors that make campaign donations to campaign accounts all the time. The issue here is that, yeah, I have heard reports, a lot of reports about pressure on people to make donations and pressure on vendors of the state to make contributions to the Hope Florida Foundation. And depending on how that message was conveyed and how much pressure was applied, that would be a problem. But I don't have the information right now to say whether or not that happened.
Now, the governor, Ron DeSantis, has been forced into responding to this because your investigation has been ongoing. It has been kind of metastasizing this scandal. You're on I think you're at least your second subcommittee meeting about this. You have another one coming up next week. And he has been forced to respond in a series of press conferences, including one in your district that he seemed to program or schedule as counter-programming to your most recent subcommittee meeting at like exactly the same time. So I'm going to play this clip and give you an opportunity to respond to the governor.
This is a manufactured hoax, and you have liberal media and liberal Democrats pushing this, and we have some of these leaders in the Florida House who are stabbing their constituents in the back to try to sabotage all the great success that Florida's had. None of these Republican leaders got elected on the platform that they were going to launch baseless attacks against the governor and first lady. Shame on you in the Florida House and your terrible behavior and leadership. Some people feel threatened by the first lady. Let's just be clear about that. They know this. They say, you saw her up here. You know, if you're looking at like 2026 and you've got some horse that you don't want her anywhere near that. You're very worried because she runs circles around their people. Everybody knows that.
Those clips are from no less than 3 separate events over the last 10 days or so, and we had to cut those down considerably. The governor had a lot more to say.
Oh, that's BS. No, totally BS.
So I want to give you an opportunity to respond, because obviously he's throwing shade, particularly when he goes literally into not your backyard, but your front yard to talk about this.
Yeah, Governor DeSantis has been acting more kind of manic and emotional and erratic as the weeks progress. It's almost tough not to feel sorry for him. I mean, yeah, he scheduled his press conference in my district to start at the exact same time as my committee meeting yesterday. And in fact, I tried to pull up the press conference and have it on mute on the big screens in our committee room, but we have rules about using props in committee. But no, I'm glad Governor DeSantis visited my district. It's always nice when the governor visits. I just wish he didn't try and equate, fighting against fraud, waste, abuse, money laundering, and wire fraud as somehow a liberal tendency. I thought he loves that line that he claims he was Doge before Doge was cool. Well, dude, get your own house in order. The same agency that transferred this $10 million, directed this $10 million donation that ended up in his chief of staff's PAC, just happened to lose $160 million that we discovered a few weeks ago. They just misplaced it. Like, we gave them money a couple years ago to pay a federal fine, $160 million worth. They put it in the wrong bank account and they used it for cash flow. So now we as the state have to pay that $160 million fine twice because his own agency keeps screwing it up. At the end of the day, like right now, unfortunately for DeSantis, like he's exposing himself. Like he's a great congressman. He's welcome to run for the Florida House of Representatives when he gets done as governor, if he thinks he can do this job better. But he's exposing himself as a great legislator, but a terrible manager.
The spokesman for now Attorney General James Uthmire, Jeremy Redfern, tweeted, or whatever we call it now, the following. In response to this, not surprised that the leftist media didn't include the comment I gave them last night. Anyway, here's my response to this nonsense. This is an unserious probe being driven by an unserious representative, that's you, who is carrying the water for the very mega marijuana corporation that spent over $150 million in the effort to allow unrestricted public marijuana use and lost. I guess he's talking about your connections or alleged connections to True Leave. How do you respond to Mr. Redfern?
I don't know if that even requires a response. I mean, like, yeah, they're trying to say that I'm, doing the bidding of John Morgan at Morgan and Morgan and doing the bidding of True Leave and Big Weed. One, yeah, I voted for Amendment 3, as did the majority of Floridians, as did President Trump. That doesn't mean I cared that much about it. I happen to have issues with the fact that it didn't have home grow in it as well. Like, I filed a bill this year for home grow as kind of like a thumb in the eye to like True Leave's kind of mistake on that part of their amendment. But the plaintiffs bar hates me. The plaintiffs lawyers in Florida, at least on the advocacy lobbying side, they've despised me just because of the positions I've taken in the legislature. So when I say like I don't know if it requires me to respond, it's such a weird, stupid attack. And if you can't address the argument, like his boss directed $10 million in Medicaid money that ended up in his own PAC. If they can't address that, they're going to go attack people. And I guess because they can't address that, they're just attacking people.
So what's next from here? I understand that there's an effort now to kind of retroactively clean up this mess. They managed to hire a lawyer that sort of continues this bizarre incestuous cesspool here of conflicts of interest. So what's next?
They hired the PAC's lawyer. Yeah, they hired the PAC's lawyer, this charity that shoveled this money into James's PAC. They hired the PAC's lawyer to fix their charitable documents, their charity compliance documents. We've invited another lawyer at the center of this named Jeff Aaron, who was the attorney for the Hope Florida Foundation, to come next week and explain himself. And we invited those two dark money groups, the Secure Florida's Future and Save Our Society from Drugs, to come next week and explain themselves to the committee. I've also requested a ton of documentation from the state agencies and from these groups. If I don't get them in the next few days, we'll probably send subpoenas next week just to require the documents to be produced.
And can you subpoena these folks to actually physically appear and testify before your subcommittee?
Yeah, one fun, unique thing about the Florida legislature is while we are in session, we don't need a judge to enforce a subpoena. We can send our own sergeant at arms to go enforce the subpoena, so we don't need prior judicial authorization. So there's really very little they can do to contest it if we do it while we're in session. So we have about 3 weeks left of session, maybe 2 weeks after this one. So yeah, we might do some of that work before we're done.
You've said that this investigation perhaps should not just be in this subcommittee. Depending on what you find next, where do you think this should go?
I think that the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Florida should be concerned about the misuse of Medicaid money and the wire fraud and money laundering that's been uncovered. If I'm a federal prosecutor, I'm building a RICO case right now, and James Uthmeyer and the other attorney, Jeff Aaron, are at the center of it.
Speaking of the bipartisanship of the need to target waste, fraud, and abuse, I don't know that DOJ has done any of that, but it certainly appears that you are doing that. I mean, $10 million might seem a blip on the radar screen in the grand scheme of budgets of states the size of Florida, which is in and of itself sort of the economy of a small country. And one could certainly argue, as the governor has, that the residents of the state of Florida have bigger problems than this. But if this, in fact, was a crime committed with taxpayer money, if you are the chairman of the the Florida House Healthcare Budget Subcommittee, so all these things that the governor is saying, like the Florida House should be focusing its attention on, that's not necessarily your purview. Not to mention, the governor has never been shy about using his bully pulpit to force his own agenda on the legislature. So if he wants you guys focusing on, condo or HOA reform or dealing with lowering property taxes or, insurance premiums or whatever this stuff is, why isn't he doesn't the buck stop with him? Why isn't he leading the charge on this sort of thing? What do you think about because I see again the governor here playing the politics of diversion, kind of the idea of, saying like, well, why are we talking about this when we should be talking about this? And, and that's not a very good impersonation of,
no, that's
Godfrey
of the, so, but like, what is with this like, you've got a purview as chairman of your subcommittee. He's trying to say like, we shouldn't be talking about this. We should be talking about that. And of course that the reference he made to his wife, and her political ambitions in 2026 to run for governor, and that this is some kind of, I don't know, like some sort of battle between, I don't know, Trump Republicans and the DeSantis family to derail Takio's hopes and dreams.
I mean, I haven't really mentioned Casey because I didn't see her personally reaching out to these dark money groups and telling them to ask for $5 million apiece and then telling them to give them to my PAC. As far as I'm concerned, the only issue for Casey is that she's held up this Hope Florida Foundation as like a campaign platform, and she hasn't really spent much time making sure they're complying with any of the statutes that they're required to comply with. And she really hasn't spent a lot of time making sure the program is actually doing what it's supposed to do. Like I shared with you before we started talking, the executive director for the Hope Florida operational arm resigned today after the committee yesterday. I anticipate more of these press conferences, and I've always equated Governor DeSantis' accent as like New Jersey mixed with toddler. I'll be subjected to more of those. But he went to my district yesterday, and I had a bunch of people call me. Not a single person called me in agreement with the governor. They all called me and encouraged me to keep doing what I was doing and get to the bottom of where this money went and how it was used and misappropriated. He's still a Republican governor. I share his philosophical views on how government's supposed to run. We still need to get a balanced budget passed the next few weeks. We need to send that to the governor for his signature. He's inevitably going to veto a ton of stuff out of our budget to be, petty and retributive. And then we'll have to decide if we're going to override all of his vetoes.
Last question. As you mentioned, minutes before this interview, Eric Dellenbach, the executive director of the Hope Florida Foundation, only since January, he's been on the job just a few months, he just resigned. Scapegoat going to scapegoat. Does the buck stop with this Dellenbach guy, or are there more scalps?
Dellenbach wasn't implicated in any wrongdoing. As far as I'm concerned, the people implicated the most are Attorney General James Uthmeyer and this other attorney, which, by the way, Jeff Aaron is DeSantis' personal attorney. The only two people I've seen who are directly implicated in wrongdoing and wouldn't be associated just by virtue of like part of a RICO conspiracy type thing. The people that actually did wrong were Jeff Aaron and James Uthmeyer. So the only way for DeSantis and Casey DeSantis to like scapegoat anybody is for James Uthmeyer to resign as the attorney general or take responsibility for what happened and subject himself to prosecution. So we'll see what happens. I really couldn't tell you. I'm not a prosecutor, but I'll tell you, if I was the Northern District attorney, the U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Florida, I'd be paying attention to this because it's a pretty clear-cut case of, like I said, money laundering, wire fraud, and Medicaid fraud.
Florida State Rep Alex Andrade, thanks so much. Good luck. I'll be watching. Who knew what riveting television Florida House Healthcare Budget Subcommittees could be? And there really have been like Law and Order and Perry Mason-esque kind of revelations and twists and cross-examinations. I mean, it's been great television. So thank you for that, at the very least.
Well, I'd much rather be focused on like achieve savings rebates and making sure our, HEDIS measures and healthcare outcomes for Medicaid individuals in Florida are improving. But unfortunately, because of the bad acts of a few bad apples, we're having to focus on this.
Yeah, but that sounds boring. Like money laundering and wire fraud, or
I got $35 billion I'm responsible for in the healthcare budget. I love boring.
Absolutely. I'm a big MABA guy. Let's make America boring again. That's right. Certainly make government boring again.
Oh,
but in the meantime, thank you so much for being here.
State lawmakers asking tough questions about how $10 million was funneled into a nonprofit called Hope Florida and not into a state bank account. The charity was spearheaded by First Lady Casey DeSantis. The money was baked into a $67 million settlement between health giant Centene and the Agency for Healthcare Administration. $57 million went back to taxpayers. $10 million went to Hope Florida, a welfare assistance program to help people become less reliant on taxpayer-funded programs.
That cash quickly went out the door to two nonprofits for $5 million grants and promises that the money would be used to further Hope Florida's mission, not politics. But those nonprofits later gave millions to a political committee fighting and defeating last year's recreational weed amendment, Keep Florida Clean, a group chaired by former DeSantis Chief of Staff turned Attorney General James Uthmeyer.
Follow the money. That was the great lesson from Deep Throat in the movie version of All the President's Men. I don't think that happened in real life, but it was a great line that the screenwriter came up with. And that has been sort of the mantra of every investigative reporter, particularly in political corruption stories. And no different here. Over the last 10 days or so, this story has metastasized into a full-blown scandal here in the state of Florida and turned the Republican Party against each other into this wild kind of internal battle between what appears to be kind of the Trump Republicans versus really the DeSantises by themselves, both the governor, Ron DeSantis, and the First Lady, Casey DeSantis, who's planning a run for governor in 2026. And this has been this Hope Florida Foundation has been like her pet project as the Florida First Lady. And it's turning into a possible investigation into money laundering and wire fraud. And this is a crazy story. And the Woodward and Bernstein of this story are Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times reporters who cover the state capitol in Tallahassee, Florida, Alexandria Glorioso and Lawrence Mower, who are joining us now. And they broke this story about this, we'll call it questionable. When I say questionable, I mean possibly illegal $10 million donation to Casey DeSantis's foundation. First up, Alexandria, what is it that you guys first found that kind of led you to ask this question here about what was this money? Where did it come from? Was it legal? What happened initially?
So I got a copy of meeting minutes from October 2024. And, this is a charity sanctioned by the state in state law. So the meeting minutes are supposed to be public, but they haven't been. So when I saw the meeting minutes, I was really intrigued. And what the meeting minutes said was that there was a $10 million allocation to the foundation due to a long-standing dispute between what eventually came out was the state agency for healthcare administration and the state's largest Medicaid contractor, Centene, which had been overbilling the state for prescription drugs, essentially. And they were settling over it. And, we didn't know everything when we got those minutes, but we knew that the foundation was getting $10 million. And that was the first donation that we knew about to the foundation because everything has been so secretive.
And this was a settlement between the state and this provider, of which the money was, I guess, supposed to go to the state. But this $10 million was kind of diverted to the First Lady's foundation. Generally speaking, does this foundation take in that kind of money? Do they commonly get multi-million dollar donations of this size?
No, this is basically the largest donation they've ever taken in by far. And we just got a copy of their 990s. They've never filed their taxes. They're going to approve their taxes on Thursday. And it shows that this is by far the largest donation they've ever taken in.
So let me ask you about that, because it seems like they haven't been following any laws at all. They haven't filed, you just said they haven't filed their taxes. The minutes, Alexandra just said, were not available for their meetings. What kind of a foundation is this that just operates in secret? And this donation at first was a secret, in fact, wasn't it?
The donation was a secret. We didn't discover exactly what the details were until there was a hearing in the House last week where the chairman of the committee said that he had gotten a copy of the settlement between the Medicaid contractor Centene and the state agency. And we got a copy of the settlement, and it showed that as part of that settlement, Centene would make the donation to the charity. But the company clarified on the record that, they were directed to do this as part of the settlement agreement. So this is Medicaid money. It's highly regulated money. 57% of it belongs to the federal government. Any settlement has to go back to state coffers. So and the state acknowledged that or at least the chair said the state acknowledged that they did send the money back to the federal government of the 57 million. So this $10 million has been in dispute, and the origin of it was a mystery until we, were able to piece it together and report it. I mean, all of this was hidden from the public.
And Lawrence, I understand that this $10 million donation, whatever you want to call it, settlement, secret money, didn't stay in the Hope Florida Foundation for very long. What did you find out about, as you continue to follow that money?
Well, what we learned is that what we know now is that it looks like DeSantis' chief of staff, James Othmeyer, who's currently the attorney general, told two dark money groups, one run by the Chamber of Commerce. These are 501c4s that don't have to disclose their donors. Othmeyer called them up and said, hey, why don't you apply for $5 million grants through the foundation? And it seemed like, with the understanding that that money would then be passed on to a political committee chaired by Othmeyer. And that seems to be what happened. They did apply for the money. It was quickly given to them. One of the $5 million donations wasn't even approved in a board meeting. The board chair just approved it on his own after getting legal counsel, he said. And so it went to a political committee chaired by Othmeyer. And then from there, it looks like the money went to the Republican Party of Florida to fight Amendment 3. And possibly to DeSantis's own political committee. 1.1 million went to his political committee. We don't exactly know because of the way Florida, allows political committees to move exactly it went. But we know that this committee gave 1.1 million to DeSantis's own political committee.
Alexandra, I imagine this Hope Florida Foundation has a very specific mission. It's supposed to take in funds and use funds for a very specific purpose. I guess we don't know because they haven't reported a damn thing in all of the years since Casey DeSantis founded it. But is their money from Hope Florida supposed to go to these political committees? Is it supposed to go towards political ads to fight in this case, Amendment 3, which was the recreational marijuana constitutional amendment that got overwhelming support, but not the 60% sufficient support necessary to pass as a state constitutional amendment? Is that where this money's supposed to be going?
Well, first of all, if this is Medicaid money, and it appears that it is Medicaid money, it seems very unlikely that it can go anywhere other than back to the state for purposes of Medicaid and back to the federal government for purposes of Medicaid. So that's just like out the gate. Like, this is money that is highly, highly regulated. And then regarding the foundation, I mean, okay, so the foundation is a strange creature called a direct support organization that the legislature passed, I think in 2023, to allow state agencies, which are chronically underfunded, to fundraise. And it supports the mission of those state agencies. And one of those state agencies is the Department of Children and Families, always strapped for cash. And this organization, the Hope Florida Foundation, is supposed to be supporting the Department of Children and Families mission, which it says in its articles of incorporation, something like protecting children, helping children. And so can a political committee that is fighting recreational marijuana say that it's there protecting children and the mission of supporting children? I mean, that's, I guess, for the public and the prosecutors to decide, but what they said in the committee, what, Department of Children and Families Secretary Taylor Hatch said in the committee is that she wasn't even aware of the, transfer to the foundation to these organizations. And because she hadn't been on the job, because she and another agency secretary switched places recently, and over this whole thing, I'm sure. And so she didn't even know about it. And she said that according to their grant applications, which were only a few pages long, that she took it as they were supporting people in addiction recovery. And therefore, that met the mission. I mean...
Well, Lawrence, let's go back to this. What did, James Othmeyer know, and when did he know it? He was then DeSantis's attorney. I'm sorry, he was then the chief of staff for the governor Ron DeSantis at the time this went down, and he's now the attorney general. He's sending these two or behind these two kind of identical letters requesting each $5 million. I have to guess if this Hope Florida Foundation has never received a donation as big as $10 million before, they probably also have not disseminated grants of as much as $5 million each before. I have to imagine that was unprecedented as well. So what is the, you know what I call this, Roy? Does it pass the whisper test? That's what I call this, the whisper. So the whisper test is this, like, let's talk about like, hey, Roy, you know what I'm going to do? Let's go out, raise millions of dollars for a charity to help fund healthcare for underserved communities. You would say to me, hey, Bill, why are you whispering? That sounds like a perfectly legitimate, noble thing, right?
Yeah, why are you whispering?
Right. So this is the whisper test. Now let's do this. Hey, listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take $10 million as part of this Medicaid settlement that's supposed to go to the state, and I'm going to send it to the First Lady's charity. And then we're immediately going to have checks requested by the governor's chief of staff of $5 million each to go to these political organizations so they can use it for. Sounds like shady shit, doesn't it? Doesn't pass the whisper test, right? The second you start to, when you're whispering something, you're like, yeah, that doesn't seem necessary to be like, that doesn't sound shady. Like, this just sounds overtly shady. So was this shady, Lawrence? Was there something about the way this flow through went that could constitute wire fraud or money laundering, and what happens now?
Well, we don't exactly know the legal ramifications yet, but something that was noted in the committee on Wednesday is that there was a state rep who runs a charity and asked why was there no press release about this? Usually when people give to charities, there's a big press release. They have letterhead everywhere. The 501c4 that got $5 million, the one that's controlled by the Chamber of Commerce, Mark Wilson, that grant application says we will not disclose where the money came from, which also was noted in the committee, and that also seems very strange considering usually if a charity is giving out money like that, they want a press release, they want their name on letterhead, they want promotional activities, based on it. They want the recipient to say, hey, we got this money from the United Way or something like that. And none of that was done here. And so, yeah, certainly to some lawmakers, that's highly suspicious.
And I will say, just minutes before this interview began, breaking news, the executive director of Hope Florida Foundation resigned. Eric Dellenbach, after just 3 months on the job, is now, I guess, scapegoat's going to scapegoat. Is that who is ultimately responsible for this? This guy?
No, I mean the people who are responsible for Hope Florida are the DeSantises. I mean, this is a vision of Casey DeSantis. She wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about it. And, Eric Dellenbach, however, has been very central to their mission, which is to essentially integrate church and state. There's an Office of Faith Council that they're trying to enshrine into law, and he has been the liaison from DeSantis to the faith community, essentially, since he assumed office. So, the fact that he is gone now is pretty significant, I think.
And I'll note that, in the committee last week, the head of, the agency basically the longtime previous secretary for DCF, which is kind of running the Hope Florida operation, was asked repeatedly, who's in charge of Hope Florida? There's nobody in charge, and none of the people could answer that anyone was in charge. They didn't think anyone was in charge. Meanwhile, this guy has had the title since January. So no, he's probably not the one who's been orchestrating all this.
Before we go, I want to ask this. The issue of DeSantis using, I think, in excess of $15 million, Jason Garcia reported, in taxpayer money, earmarked for very specific departments in the state government for ads last year, fighting against Amendment 3, the recreational marijuana amendment, fighting against Amendment 4 to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. the Republican House and legislature didn't really seem to have an issue with any of that at the time. Anything from your reporting kind of indicate why this is now such a big issue that the governor's own party in power is examining at this with a fine-tooth comb here?
Let me take that. I mean, it's basically that there's really been a handful of lawmakers. It's the House essentially that is really raising questions about DeSantis' spending overall. And these are long-standing questions that privately lawmakers up here have been whispering for years, but have not felt they have the political clout to really dig into it. And it's no secret that lawmakers have been extremely frustrated by the way DeSantis has treated them over the years. And so, yeah, this is the culmination of, basically tensions boiling over and House Republicans saying, okay, we want to actually do our jobs and dig into this stuff. I mean, they're the ones, the legislature, they're the appropriators. They're the ones who are supposed to assign the money. And, they're supposed to know where the money's going. It's a major question under DeSantis' tenure is like, where's all this money gone?
Alexandria, last word. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak preview, not to spoil anything, but where is this reporting going next? What are the next steps in this? I'm sure more heads are going to roll.
Well, we just updated our story yesterday with images of text messages that were given to us late Tuesday evening by Representative Alex Andrade, which he said were, delivered on behalf of the executive director for one of the dark money groups as part of his request on Tuesday to all members involved for documents. So, that's getting a lot of eyeballs. It shows that, then Chief of Staff James Othmeyer actually reached out to the executive director of the dark money group and wanted to talk to her around the time that she reached out and got the grant. And when she applied for the grant, the foundation attorney, Jeff Aaron, was coordinating with her, telling her to email him the grant and that he would send it on to the board. And then he immediately, as soon as she sent it, asked for her wire instructions. And then they communicated until, that was on a Friday, and they communicated until she got the wired $5 million into her dark money organization's bank account on Tuesday, October 22nd. And so that's captured in images now, and that's in our story. And it's going to go on. There's going to be another hearing, on Thursday. There was a board meeting. There's going to be a board meeting on this coming Thursday. Which I think by the time this airs is yesterday, a board meeting, and we just got their 990s, so we're going through them. They're kind of like a who's who of state contractors. So, the documents are coming now. That's the stage of where we are.
Sorry, guys, I'm listening to something in my ear technically, so I'll do the closing right now. 5, 4, 3, 2. Well, keep following the money. Alexandria Glorioso, Lawrence Mower. Find their extraordinary reporting at MiamiHerald.com and TampaBay.com. Keep up the great work. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Billy.
Thanks.
Last week, we lost Miami City Commissioner Manolo Reyes, who passed away on April 10th. He had a mass and burial this week in Miami. I will say about him, he is one of the few sitting Miami commissioners to ever appear on the Because Miami program. We got a shot of that right there, Dan and I, and with some of my pandemic hair.
Well, I'm glad that is done.
And Manolo Reyes joining us, talking about, at the time, the Mel Reese public sports welfare boondoggle. And I will say, Manolo Reyes and his allyship with Alexias Laportilla and Joe Carollo really helped to put Miami into the situation that it's in now. But he knew right from wrong. And when he wanted to take an ideological stand like he did on Mel Reese, on the right side of that issue and on the right side of history, he did. I wished he had done it more often, and I wished he had more time, because in recent years he was right more often than not, which was a change of pace, I'll admit, from his first term at the city of Miami. I'm sorry to see him go, because at the very least, even when he was wrong, I don't think that he was corrupt, and I don't think that he was evil, like a man like Joe Carollo is, just genuinely corrupt and in it for himself. Manolo Reyes was very much, by all accounts, committed to public service, and particularly committed to constituent services, which is what government really should be doing, serving its constituents. And he and his staff really made a commitment to communicate with the media, to communicate with the public, and to serve the people of their district. I'm very sad to see him go, particularly because it was a long-standing dream of his to be the mayor of the city of Miami. And after his second bout of cancer and surviving that last year, he had the headline at the Miami Herald was, "After cancer battle, Miami Commissioner Manolo Reyes plans to run for mayor, quote, God willing," end quote. And Manolo Reyes did not make it. The mayoral race is, in fact, this year. People are just getting into the race. You'll remember we interviewed former city commissioner Ken Russell, who is running for mayor. And now, get this, Roy. On Wednesday, the same day as the mass and burial of the late Manolo Reyes, hours later, the man is barely in the ground. Joe Carollo went out to the Redlands, not even in the city, to have his mayoral campaign kickoff.
That's fucked up.
And really just to stick it to not only Manolo Reyes and his family, but to stick it to the city of Miami. He's having this event way out in the boonies, 23 miles away from City Hall, because I don't think people want to be seen with him. They don't want to be seen giving money to this dirtbag. And he's doing it at a place called El Toro Loco Ranch out in the Redlands.
Bull.
El Toro Loco is that food truck right across the street here at Bayfront Park, who it is alleged in the latest corruption lawsuit against Joe Carollo by the former Bayfront Park Management Trust executive director, that they were stealing electricity, running a wire to steal electricity from the taxpayers. And when the executive director of Bayfront Park called it out and said, you got to get a generator and pay for your own gas and electricity, these people have been such big supporters of Joe Carollo that Joe was really pissed at this guy. It's part of the reason why he eventually excommunicated and shit-canned him. So that's where he is while Manolo Reyes is being memorialized and interned, and his family is in mourning. And just for our Miami moment, it's, while Manolo Reyes was effectively sick and dying, he was still showing up for work, sometimes in person at City Hall for commission meetings, and sometimes remotely via Zoom video, where he seemed, I thought, more engaged and aware and involved and than ever. But Joe Carollo, ever the sociopathic bully, as one of his daughters described him, couldn't help but beat up on this dying man. So just as a little Miami moment to remember that we get the government we deserve, let's get a little taste of Joe Carollo and versus Manolo Reyes, the mayor we could have had, and the mayor that we may very well have, because Joe Carollo could very well be the next mayor of Miami. So happy Passover to everyone. Happy Easter to everyone. I'll be celebrating my favorite holiday on Monday. That's when the Easter candy goes on clearance sale, 50% off Cadbury cream eggs.
And I'll be celebrating my favorite holiday, which is the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Happy Purim!
Cocaine's.
You're making decisions in every darn meeting, not based upon what's best for the city, what's best upon Mr. Reyes, because he wants to be mayor.
Hey, no, it doesn't matter if I want to be mayor or not.
Of course,
and I want to clarify this. And let me tell you this.
Sir,
I am.
Stop it.
I am all for opening up the part.
Let's use our inside voice as well.
And wait what's going to happen. I said it before. I mean, this gentleman, he tends to attack everybody.
I understand, Commissioner Reyes. Just
you're wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's use our inside voices. Let's use our inside voices.
Okay.
And point of clarification.
Well, point of clarification. I want to know what we are voting on.
He knows who we're voting upon.
I don't know, man.
Okay.
He just wants to keep stalling.
Okay, Commissioner Carollo, please, point of clarification for Commissioner Reyes, and then Commissioner Pardo would like to say something else. Okay, but let's not. I understand we're very passionate, but we don't have to yell at each other, please.
No te aguanto a ti tampoco. ¿Qué carajo? Okay. Tú estás todo equivocado. Yo quiero abrir el parque.
Okay, buddy.
Okay.
A
mí no me hace. Yo no te tengo miedo a ti.
Gentlemen,
Enough. Cállate la boca y no jeringue más, okay?
Please.